Montana, 1911. Wilhelm Hartman's chimney looked like madness wrapped in brick. Every other settler in the territory had built their chimneys the normal way: brick, stone, straight from stove to roof. Simple, proven, safe. Wilhelm's chimney was different. 3 steel water tanks, 40-gallon drums, built directly into the masonry, metal surfaces visible between the brickwork, pipes snaking up through the stack like iron veins. It didn't look like innovation. It looked like a bomb. Edward Fletcher stood staring at it, Wilhelm's nearest neighbor, horror and fascination fighting for control of his face. "You've built a bomb," Edward said finally. "Those tanks are going to heat up and explode. You'll blow your roof off." Wilhelm kept working. Mortar, brick, precision, the movements of a man who knew exactly what he was doing. "The tanks won't explode," he said, not looking up. "The pressure will be controlled. The water will circulate. And I'll have hot water all winter, without carrying a single bucket from the creek." Hot water. Edward repeated the words like Wilhelm had just claimed he could fly. "You think smoke going up a chimney is going to heat 40-gallon tanks of water? That's not how heat works. The smoke goes up and out. It doesn't linger long enough. The smoke will give up its heat to the tanks before it exits," Wilhelm said patiently. "That's waste heat. Every stove chimney in Montana is throwing away enough heat to warm water. I'm just capturing it." Edward shook his head slowly. "And those pipes connecting the tanks. What are those for?" "Thermosiphon circulation. Hot water rises. Cold water sinks. The water will circulate naturally through all 3 tanks. The bottom tank feeds the stove coil. The stove coil heats water, which rises to the middle tank. Middle tank water cools and sinks or rises to the top tank, depending on temperature. It's a continuous cycle." Edward looked at Wilhelm like he was speaking a foreign language. "I don't understand a word you just said. What I do understand is that you've got steel tanks in your chimney. Steel conducts heat. Those tanks are going to get hot. Water expands when it heats. Something's going to give, and when it does, you'll have boiling water and steam exploding through your cabin." The other neighbors agreed. The consensus around the small ranching community near Great Falls was simple. Wilhelm had finally cracked under the isolation of frontier life. The German immigrant had always been odd, bookish, too much time spent thinking, not enough spent doing things the normal way. And now he'd built a contraption that would almost certainly kill him. The women in the community organized a betting pool. How long before disaster struck? Would the tanks explode within a week? A month? Would they make it to winter before the inevitable catastrophe? The odds favored early failure. Some people felt genuinely sorry for Wilhelm. He was 42 years old, a widower, living alone on his homestead. If his chimney exploded, there'd be no one to help him. He'd burn to death or scald to death, and they wouldn't find the body until spring. That was a bad way to go. Others were less sympathetic. If a man was foolish enough to ignore common sense and build a water heater chimney, despite everyone warning him, well, that was natural selection at work. The frontier didn't tolerate fools. Wilhelm would learn, or he'd die. Either way, the problem would resolve itself. Wilhelm ignored all of it. He'd dealt with skepticism his entire life. Growing up in the Black Forest region of Germany, he'd been the son of a millwright who designed water wheels and mechanical systems for lumber mills. He'd learned engineering principles from his father, apprenticed as a machinist, studied thermodynamics, fluid dynamics, and heat transfer before those terms were common knowledge. When he immigrated to America in 1898, he brought knowledge that most frontier settlers simply didn't have. He understood how heat moved through systems. He understood pressure and temperature relationships. He understood the principles of thermal mass and heat exchange. And he understood that conventional wood stoves were criminally inefficient. A typical wood stove in 1911 converted maybe 30 to 40% of the wood's energy into useful heat for the room. The rest? Up the chimney as hot smoke and gases. That waste heat was enough to warm significant amounts of water. It was being thrown away every single day. Every single stove in every single cabin was discarding enough energy to provide hot water for bathing, washing, and heating. Wilhelm had decided to capture that waste heat. The design was complex, but not unprecedented. Similar systems existed in parts of Europe, though they weren't common even there. The challenge was building a chimney that could incorporate water tanks without creating dangerous pressure buildup, without causing the chimney to crack from differential expansion, and without impeding the draft necessary for the stove to function. Wilhelm had spent 2 years planning the design. Calculations on paper, heat transfer rates, water circulation patterns, structural requirements. He'd corresponded with a former colleague in Germany who had experience with industrial heat exchangers. He'd tested small-scale prototypes in his workshop. By the time he started construction in August 1911, he knew the system would work. The foundation came first. The chimney would be heavy. 3 tanks, each weighing 60 pounds empty, and 400 pounds when full of water, plus all the brickwork, plus the stove. Total weight, over 3 tons. Wilhelm built a reinforced foundation of stones and concrete, extending 4 feet below ground level and rising 2 feet above the floor. This foundation could support twice the weight without settling. The stove was a custom design Wilhelm had fabricated himself. Cast iron firebox, but with a crucial addition, a water jacket surrounding the firebox. This jacket was a double-walled chamber that water could flow through. Fire heated the inner wall. Water in the jacket absorbed that heat. The heated water then rose through a pipe to the first tank. This was the primary heat input to the system. Everything else was supplemental. The first tank, the lowest one, was positioned about 3 feet above the stove. It served as the primary heat collector. Hot water from the stove water jacket entered the bottom of this tank. As it heated, it rose to the top of the tank where a pipe connected to the second tank. Cold water from the second tank descended through a different pipe to refill the first tank. Thermosiphon circulation. Natural convection. No pumps needed. The second tank was positioned 6 feet above the first, integrated into the chimney brickwork at about shoulder height. This tank had multiple functions. It received hot water from the first tank. It also had the chimney flue passing through it, not touching the water directly, but close enough that heat from the flue warmed the tank's contents. This was waste heat recovery. The hot smoke traveling up the chimney would give up some of its heat to the water before exiting. The third tank, the highest one, was positioned at the roof line. This tank was also integrated with the chimney flue passing through it. It served as additional waste heat recovery and as a hot water storage reservoir. The tanks were connected so water could circulate through all 3 in a continuous loop. As water heated in the lower tanks, it rose to the upper tank. As it cooled, it sank back down. The system was self-regulating through natural convection. The brickwork around the tank served multiple purposes: structural support, thermal mass to store and radiate heat into the room, protection of the tanks from physical damage, and aesthetic coverage so the system didn't look like 3 drums stacked in a chimney. Wilhelm built the chimney double-walled in sections. Inner flue carried the smoke. Outer wall provided structural support and thermal mass. The tanks were sandwiched between these walls, surrounded by brick on all sides, except for access panels that allowed Wilhelm to check on them. The most controversial element was the pressure relief system. Wilhelm had installed a pipe at the top of the highest tank that led outside. If pressure built up too much, water and steam could escape through this relief pipe rather than bursting the tanks. Edward and others saw this relief pipe as proof that Wilhelm knew the system was dangerous. Why would you need a relief valve if the system was safe? Wilhelm tried to explain. Any closed water system needs pressure relief. It's basic safety engineering. You design for the worst case. The relief valve is there to prevent disaster. In the unlikely event, something goes wrong. It's a safeguard, not an admission of danger. The explanations didn't convince anyone. By mid-October 1911, when Wilhelm was ready to test the system, most of the community was staying away from his homestead. They expected an explosion. They didn't want to be nearby when it happened. Wilhelm conducted his first test on October 20th. He'd filled all 3 tanks with the water, a total of 120 gallons. He checked all the connections for leaks. He'd opened the draft controls. He built a small fire in the stove, just kindling and a few small logs. He wanted to heat the system gradually. No thermal shock. The fire burned. Smoke rose through the chimney. The stove water jacket began warming. Wilhelm monitored the system carefully. After 30 minutes, he could feel the first tank warming up. The water inside was heating. After 1 hour, the water in the first tank was noticeably hot. Wilhelm opened the drain valve slightly. Hot water flowed out. Not boiling, but hot enough for washing. Perhaps 140 degrees. After 2 hours, the second tank was warming. The flue gases passing through it were giving up their heat. The water temperature in the second tank was rising. After 3 hours, even the third tank showed warming. The entire system was functioning. Water was circulating naturally through thermosiphon. The stove was burning efficiently with good draft. No explosions, no leaks, no problems. Wilhelm let the system run overnight, maintaining a moderate fire. By morning, all 3 tanks were hot. He could draw hot water from any of them. The cabin was warm from the stove's radiant heat, and from the heated chimney mass radiating warmth. And the chimney itself was warmer than a conventional chimney, meaning more heat was staying in the cabin instead of escaping outside. He'd done it. The system worked exactly as he'd calculated it would. Edward Fletcher was the first neighbor to visit after the test. He arrived expecting to find wreckage. Instead, he found Wilhelm calmly making coffee with hot water drawn from a tap connected to the middle tank. "It hasn't exploded," Edward said, stating the obvious because he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. "It won't explode. The system is designed properly. Come, feel the tanks." Edward cautiously approached the chimney. He touched the brick surface. It was warm, but not dangerously hot. Wilhelm opened an access panel showing the middle tank. The steel surface was hot to touch, but not glowing. "The water inside is about 160 degrees, Wilhelm explained. Hot enough for washing, but not boiling. The thermosiphon circulation keeps the temperature relatively even through all 3 tanks. The relief valve hasn't activated because the pressure hasn't built to that level. It's working as designed." Edward watched Wilhelm draw hot water from the tap. Clean, hot water. No carrying buckets from the creek. No heating water on the stovetop. Just turned the tap and hot water flowed. "This is impossible," Edward said, though he was watching it happen. "It's not impossible. It's engineering. Every stove throws away waste heat. I'm just capturing it. Probably recovering 30 to 40% of the heat that would otherwise go up the chimney. That heat warms water. The water stores that heat. I have hot water whenever I need it. But won't the water go cold when the fire goes out? Eventually, yes. But 3 tanks holding 120 gallons of hot water stay hot for a long time. If I fire the stove in the morning and evening, the water stays hot all day and all night. The thermal mass of the water is significant. It's a heat battery. Edward stood there processing. The system worked. Somehow, against all common sense, Wilhelm's water tank chimney actually worked. "I want one," Edward said finally. "I'll help you build it next summer," Wilhelm replied. The story spread quickly. The German fellow with the crazy chimney, the one everyone said would explode. Apparently it works. Apparently he has hot water all winter, just from waste heat. People started visiting Wilhelm's cabin to see for themselves. They'd arrive skeptical. They'd leave amazed. The 3 tanks integrated into the chimney, warm to the touch. The tap providing hot water on demand. The efficient heating of the cabin from the thermal mass of the hot chimney. It was revolutionary. By November, Wilhelm had requests from 12 families who wanted similar systems built in their homes. He agreed to help design them, but he insisted on teaching the principles rather than just building them. People needed to understand how the system worked so they could maintain it properly. He spent evenings teaching small groups. Thermosiphon circulation. Why hot water rises and cold water sinks. Heat transfer from hot gases to metal to water. Thermal mass and heat storage. Pressure and temperature relationships, safety factors and relief valves. Some people understood immediately. Others struggled with concepts that weren't part of conventional frontier knowledge. But everyone who paid attention learned enough to build their own systems, or at least maintain one that Wilhelm helped design. The first real test came in December 1911 when a cold snap brought temperatures down to -20 degrees. Wood stoves across the community burned constantly, consuming cords of firewood. Wilhelm's system shined. He fired his stove twice daily, morning and evening. Each firing lasted about 3 hours. The stove heated his cabin. The water jacket heated the first tank. The waste heat in the chimney heated the second and third tanks. Between firings, the hot water in the tanks radiated heat through the brick chimney into the cabin. The cabin temperature stayed comfortable. But more importantly, Wilhelm had hot water for washing, cooking, and bathing. He could take a hot shower in his cabin in December in Montana using a simple gravity-fed system that drew water from the highest tank and let it flow through a perforated pipe over a wooden platform in the corner of his cabin. A hot shower in -20-degree weather using only waste heat that would have been thrown away. When word of this got out, the reaction was disbelief followed by intense curiosity followed by determination. If Wilhelm could have hot showers using waste heat, everyone wanted hot showers using waste heat. This was a quality of life improvement that transcended mere convenience. This was transformative. By January 1912, 3 more families had water tank chimneys under construction. Wilhelm helped with the designs, ensuring each system was properly sized for the home and stove. He taught the builders how to make the water jackets for their stoves, how to position the tanks for optimal thermosiphon circulation, how to install pressure relief valves, how to integrate everything with the chimney structure. The results were consistent. Every system worked. Hot water from waste heat, improved cabin heating from the thermal mass of the hot chimney, reduced firewood consumption because heat that would have escaped was now captured and used. The efficiency gains were substantial. Wilhelm estimated his system recovered about 35 to 40% of the waste heat that would normally exit through the chimney. That recovered heat warmed 120 gallons of water that stayed hot for 12 to 24 hours. The equivalent of burning an additional cord of wood per month, but captured from waste rather than requiring extra fuel. Other systems showed similar efficiency. The variations depended on how well the system was designed and how carefully it was built. Poorly designed systems recovered maybe 20% of waste heat. Well-designed systems recovered up to 45%. But even the worst performing system was better than no heat recovery at all. The science behind it was elegant in its simplicity. A wood stove burning at normal operating temperatures produces combustion gases at 800 to 1,000 degrees. Those gases carry enormous amounts of heat energy. In a conventional chimney, those gases flow directly outside, carrying that heat with them. The heat is lost. In Wilhelm's design, the hot gases had to pass through sections where water tanks absorbed some of their heat before the gases could exit. This heat exchange cooled the gases while warming the water. By the time the gases exited the chimney, they were perhaps 300 to 400 degrees cooler than in a conventional system. That lost heat hadn't disappeared. It had transferred to the water. The efficiency of heat transfer depends on surface area and contact time. Wilhelm's design maximized both. The flue passing through the water tanks had significant surface area. The tanks themselves provided additional surface area. And the vertical path through the chimney meant the gases were in contact with heat-exchanging surfaces for several seconds. This was enough time for substantial heat transfer. The water circulation was driven by thermosiphon, also called natural convection. Water has a unique property. It expands when heated, becoming less dense. Less dense water is more buoyant. It rises. Cooler, denser water sinks. This creates natural circulation without any pumps or external energy input. In Wilhelm's system, hot water from the stove jacket entered the bottom of the first tank. As it heated, it became buoyant and rose to the top of the tank. From there, it flowed through a pipe to the second tank. Meanwhile, cooler water from the second tank descended through a return pipe to refill the first tank, a continuous loop. The same principle operated between the second and third tanks. Hot water rose. Cool water descended. The entire 120 gallons circulated naturally, driven solely by temperature differences. The circulation rate was slow, maybe 1 to 2 gallons per minute, but continuous over hours. This meant the entire volume circulated multiple times, ensuring even heating throughout all tanks. The thermal mass of 120 gallons of water is substantial. Water has one of the highest specific heat capacities of common materials. 1 BTU raises 1 pound of water by 1 degree. 120 gallons weighs approximately 1,000 pounds. Heating that water from 50 degrees to 160 degrees requires storing 110,000 BTUs. That's equivalent to burning about 7 pounds of dry hardwood. Once stored, that heat is released slowly as the water cools. If the cabin loses heat at a rate of, say, 10,000 BTUs per hour when outside temperature is minus 20 degrees, the stored heat in the water provides 11 hours of heating even after the fire goes out. This is why Wilhelm could fire his stove twice daily and maintain comfortable temperatures. The water thermal mass buffered the heating. During active burning, excess heat was stored in the water. Between firings, stored heat was released. The temperature swings were minimized. The chimney itself also gained thermal mass from the heated water tanks. The brickwork surrounding the tanks was warmed by contact with the hot steel. This added more thermal mass to the system. The heated chimney radiated warmth into the cabin for hours after the fire died. A conventional chimney cools quickly after the fire stops. Wilhelm's chimney stayed warm much longer because it was being heated by the water tanks as well as by the flue gases. The pressure management was critical for safety. Water expands when heated. In a closed system, this expansion increases pressure. If pressure isn't controlled, something will fail, usually the weakest point, which could be a tank seam or a pipe joint. Failure under pressure means explosion. Hot water and steam would spray everywhere. This is what everyone feared. Wilhelm prevented this with 3 safety features. First, the highest tank had an open vent pipe leading outside. This pipe allowed air to escape as water expanded, preventing pressure buildup. Second, a pressure relief valve on the top tank would open if pressure exceeded safe limits, releasing water and steam harmlessly outside. Third, the system was never completely closed. The tanks were vented to atmosphere through the relief pipe. This meant pressure could never build beyond atmospheric pressure, plus the height of the water column, perhaps 5 to 10 psi maximum, nowhere near dangerous levels. The system was inherently safe because it was open to atmosphere. It couldn't build the pressure needed for a catastrophic failure. The water quality remained good because the system was mostly closed. Contamination couldn't enter easily, but the open vent prevented pressure issues. It was the best of both designs. The gravity-fed shower was simple but effective. A pipe from the 3rd tank led to the shower area. Gravity provided the pressure. A simple valve-controlled flow. The perforated shower head was just a pipe with holes drilled in it, crude but functional. The shower platform was slatted wood over a collection pan that drained outside. No plumbing, no complexity, just hot water flowing over you in the middle of winter. For someone who'd spent years bathing from a bucket with the water heated on the stove, this was luxury. The maintenance requirements were minimal. The tanks needed to be drained and flushed once a year to remove sediment. The chimney needed normal cleaning. The relief valve needed to be tested periodically to ensure it wasn't stuck. The pipe connections needed to be checked for leaks. That was it. No moving parts to break. No complex mechanisms to maintain. Just simple, robust components working together. The longevity was excellent. Wilhelm's original system operated continuously from 1911 to 1941, 30 years. The tanks showed some rust and scale buildup, but remained intact. The brickwork needed repointing twice. The pipes needed replacement once. But the basic system never failed. Other systems built following Wilhelm's design showed similar durability. The simplicity meant there wasn't much to go wrong, and what could go wrong was easy to fix. The economic impact on families who installed these systems was significant. The hot water alone saved enormous amounts of time and labor. No more heating water on the stove for bathing and washing. No more carrying water from creeks or wells and then heating it. Just turn a tap and hot water flowed. For households with children, this was transformative. Bathing went from an ordeal to a routine task. Cleanliness improved, health improved. The psychological impact shouldn't be underestimated either. Having hot water in winter, being able to shower or bathe comfortably, maintaining personal hygiene without heroic effort. These things matter. They affect mental health, self-esteem, and quality of life in ways that are difficult to quantify, but very real. Wilhelm became known throughout central Montana as the man who'd figured out how to get hot water from waste heat. He received visitors from as far as 100 miles away, people who'd heard about his system and wanted to learn. He taught anyone who asked. He never charged for his knowledge. He viewed it as a contribution to the community. By 1915, over 40 homes in central Montana had water tank chimneys based on Wilhelm's design. The systems varied in details. Some had 2 tanks instead of 3. Some used larger or smaller tanks depending on family size and needs. Some incorporated the tanks into exterior chimneys rather than interior ones, but all followed the same basic principles: waste heat recovery, thermosiphon circulation, thermal mass storage. The efficiency gains were consistent across all implementations. Families reported using 15 to 25% less firewood while having hot water available. The time savings in not having to heat water manually were substantial. The comfort improvements were universally praised. Yet the technology never spread beyond Montana and a few nearby areas of Wyoming and Idaho. Why? Several factors limited adoption. First, it required customization. You couldn't buy a kit. Each system had to be designed for the specific home and stove. This required knowledge that most builders didn't have. Without someone like Wilhelm to teach them, people didn't know how to design the systems properly. Second, it required quality materials. The tanks needed to be well-made steel with good welds or rivets. Poor quality tanks would fail. The pipes needed to be properly sized and installed. The chimney needed to be built to support the weight. Not every builder could source or work with these materials. Third, the initial cost was higher than a conventional chimney. The tanks cost money, the extra brickwork cost money, the plumbing cost money. For families struggling financially, spending extra on the heating system wasn't possible, even if the long-term savings were substantial. Fourth, by the 1920s, alternative technologies were emerging. Rural electrification was beginning. Some areas were getting natural gas. These modern conveniences made heating water easier without requiring custom construction. The water tank chimney was frontier technology. As the frontier disappeared, so did the need for such systems. Finally, there was the knowledge transmission problem. Wilhelm taught people who built systems. Some of those people taught others, but the knowledge was primarily oral and experiential. Little was written down. When Wilhelm died in 1943, the direct line of knowledge transmission was broken. People who had systems could maintain them, but new construction became rare because the design knowledge wasn't widely distributed. The systems that existed continued operating for decades, some into the 1960s and 70s, but new construction dropped off sharply after World War II. The age of custom-built frontier systems was ending. Manufactured solutions were taking over. In the 1970s, during the energy crisis, some people rediscovered the concept of waste heat recovery from wood stoves. Engineers designed modern heat exchangers that could be added to existing chimneys. These recovered some waste heat, though usually less efficiently than Wilhelm's integrated design. The modern systems used fans to move air past heat exchangers. They recovered heat into air rather than water. They required electricity to operate. They were less elegant than Wilhelm's passive system, but easier to retrofit into existing homes. A few researchers studying historical heating systems found references to Wilhelm's water tank chimneys. A master's thesis written in 1978 at Montana State University documented the history and analyzed the thermodynamics. The thesis concluded that Wilhelm's design was thermodynamically sound and actually more efficient than many modern waste heat recovery systems. The simplicity and passive operation were particular strengths. The thesis suggested that modern versions could be built using current materials and codes, potentially providing both hot water and space heating in off-grid or energy-conscious homes. But nothing came of it. The thesis sat in the university library, occasionally read by students researching historical technology, but never sparking a revival of the concept. Today, the principles Wilhelm demonstrated are recognized as valid. Waste heat recovery, thermal mass storage, natural convection circulation. These are all established concepts in sustainable building and renewable energy. Modern solar hot water systems use thermosiphon circulation. Modern wood stoves have water jackets for hydronic heating. Modern green buildings use thermal mass for temperature stabilization. The ideas are mainstream, but Wilhelm Hartman's name is forgotten. His specific implementation is unknown except to a handful of historians and engineers who've stumbled across references in old documents. The innovation has been rediscovered and re-implemented, but the original inventor has been lost to history. Two of Wilhelm's original water tank chimneys still exist. One is in a restored historical cabin, maintained by the Cascade County Historical Society. The system doesn't operate anymore, but visitors can see how it was constructed. Information placards explain the principles in Wilhelm's story. The other is on private property in a cabin that's been in the same family for 4 generations. This system was still operational as of 2010, though it's used only occasionally. The family maintains it out of respect for their great-grandfather, who built it with Wilhelm's help in 1913. These survivors are monuments to forgotten knowledge, proof that practical innovation doesn't always come from laboratories and engineers. Sometimes it comes from immigrants with specialized training applying their knowledge in new contexts. Sometimes it comes from people willing to ignore mockery and build what they know will work. Wilhelm Hartman lived on his Montana homestead until 1941. For 30 years, he used his water tank chimney system. He never went back to heating water on a stovetop. He never went back to cold sponge baths in winter. He had hot water every day from waste heat that everyone else was throwing away. In 1941, at age 72, Wilhelm moved to Great Falls to live with his daughter's family. The homestead was sold to a young couple who were thrilled to discover the hot water system included with the property. They operated it for another 18 years before eventually installing an electric water heater in 1959. Not because the water tank chimney failed, but because electricity had finally reached their area, and they wanted the convenience of hot water without maintaining a wood fire. The water tank chimney sat idle for a few years. Then, in the mid-1960s, during another energy crisis moment when electricity prices spiked, the owners fired up the wood stove again and rediscovered the value of Wilhelm's design. Free hot water just from waste heat. They used both systems: electric water heater for convenience in summer, water tank chimney for efficiency in winter. Wilhelm died in 1943 at age 74. His obituary in the Great Falls Tribune mentioned that he was known for his innovative heating system design, but provided no details. The knowledge of what he'd accomplished was already fading. The story of Wilhelm's water tank chimney teaches several important lessons. First, waste is often opportunity. The heat going up every chimney was waste. Wilhelm saw it as opportunity. How much other waste exists around us that could be valuable resource if we looked at it differently? Second, complexity isn't always better. Wilhelm's system had no moving parts, no pumps, no electronics, just water, heat, and gravity. It worked for decades with minimal maintenance. Modern systems with pumps and controllers are more complex, but not necessarily more reliable. Sometimes the simple solution is the best solution. Third, mockery is not analysis. Everyone laughed at Wilhelm's water tank chimney. They predicted disaster. They were wrong about everything. Their mockery was based on fear of the unfamiliar, not on understanding of principles. When evaluating innovations, mockery and skepticism are not the same thing. Skepticism asks questions and looks for evidence. Mockery just dismisses. Fourth, cross-cultural and cross-disciplinary knowledge is valuable. Wilhelm brought engineering knowledge from Germany to Montana. He applied industrial heat exchanger principles to domestic heating. The combination created something new. How much innovation potential exists in connecting knowledge from different domains? Fifth, teaching and sharing knowledge multiplies impact. Wilhelm could have kept his system secret. He could have charged money for the knowledge. Instead, he taught freely. 40 families benefited. The community became more resilient. Sharing knowledge makes everyone stronger. The contrast between Wilhelm's reputation before and after his system proved itself is instructive. Before, he was the crazy German with the dangerous chimney, the man who would probably blow himself up. After, he was the innovative engineer who'd figured out hot water from waste heat. The man everyone wanted to learn from. The same person, the same knowledge, the same actions. But perception shifted 180 degrees when results spoke louder than the speculation. This suggests that we should be cautious about dismissing ideas that seem strange or impossible. Sometimes strange ideas are just wrong, but sometimes they're right, and we lack the understanding to see it. The only way to know is through rigorous analysis and testing, not through mockery and dismissal. Wilhelm's water tank chimney represents a path not taken, a technology that worked, that provided real benefits, that was economically sensible. But that faded away as other options became available. This happens frequently in technological development. Good solutions are abandoned not because they stop working, but because different solutions become more convenient or socially acceptable. The question is whether we lost something valuable in that transition. In Wilhelm's case, we lost resilience. His system worked without electricity, without natural gas, without any external infrastructure. It worked with locally available fuel and simple, maintainable components. When the power grid fails, Wilhelm's system keeps working. When supply chains break, Wilhelm's system keeps working. That resilience has value, particularly in uncertain times. Modern off-grid and sustainable living communities are rediscovering these principles. Rocket mass heaters, thermal mass storage, passive solar water heating, heat recovery systems, all of these incorporate ideas that Wilhelm used over a century ago. The modern implementations use better materials and more refined designs, but the core principles remain unchanged. Heat moves from hot to cold. Waste heat is still heat. Thermal mass stores energy. Natural convection moves fluids. These physical laws don't change with time. Wilhelm understood them. We're relearning them. The legacy of Wilhelm's work exists not in monuments or museums, but in the scattered systems that survive and in the occasional engineer or builder who discovers the old principles and realizes they still work. It exists in the thesis that sits in a university library documenting what was done and how it worked. It exists in the restored cabin where visitors can see how frontier innovation solved real problems with elegant simplicity. And it exists in stories like this, preserving knowledge that might otherwise be lost. Everyone laughed at his water tank chimney. They said it would explode. They said it wouldn't work. They said he was wasting his time and risking his life. They were wrong about all of it. The chimney didn't explode. It worked beautifully. It heated his cabin and gave him hot showers using waste heat that everyone else was throwing away. For 30 years, it provided comfort and convenience that his neighbors didn't have until they built their own systems based on his design. Wilhelm Hartman was right. The mockers were wrong. And the difference between them wasn't intelligence or courage. It was knowledge. Wilhelm understood heat transfer, fluid dynamics, and thermodynamics. His neighbors didn't. He designed based on principles. They judged based on assumptions. When you understand how the world works, you can build things that seem impossible to those who don't. Wilhelm's water tank chimney seemed impossible until it wasn't. Until it was just another proven technology that worked exactly as designed. The laughter stopped. The learning started. And dozens of families got hot water from waste heat, because one German immigrant knew more about physics than everyone who doubted him.